sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon to show us your support and get notified about the future videos. You may pause the video at times to read the questions or the answers at your own pace. To the questions. Question 1. You have an Azure Active Directory domain services domain named contoso.com. You need to provide an administrator with the ability to manage group policy objects. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. To which group should you add the administrator? Our options are A. Azure Active Directory DC administrators, B. Domain admins, C. Schema admins, D. Enterprise admins, or E. Group policy creator owners. The correct option is A. Settings for user and computer objects in Azure Active Directory domain services are often managed using group policy objects. Azure AD DS includes built-in GPUs for the Azure Active Directory DC users and Azure Active Directory DC computer containers. You can customize these built-in GPUs to configure group policy as needed for your environment. Answer A. Members of the Azure AD DC administrators group have group policy administrator privileges in the Azure AD DS domain and can also create custom GPUs and organizational units. Question 2. You have an on-premises Active Directory domain services domain that syncs with an Azure Active Directory tenant. You plan to implement self-service password reset in Azure AD. You need to ensure that users that reset their passwords by using SSPR can use the new password resources in the ADDS domain. What should you do? Our options are A. Deploy the Azure AD password protection proxy service to the on-premises network. B. Run the Microsoft Azure Active Directory Connect wizard and select password writeback. C. Grant the change password permission for the domain to the Azure AD Connect service account. Or D. Grant the impersonate a client after authentication user right to the Azure AD Connect service account. The correct option is B. Run the Microsoft Azure Active Directory Connect wizard and select password writeback. Question 3. Drag drop. You create a new Azure subscription. You plan to deploy Azure Active Directory domain services and Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the virtual machines can join to Azure AD DS. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The actions provided to us are: modify the settings of the Azure Virtual Network, install the Active Directory domain services role, install Azure AD Connect, create an Azure virtual account, create an Azure AD DS instance, run the Active Directory domain service installation wizard. The correct options in the right sequence are: create an Azure Virtual Network, create an Azure AD DS instance, modify the settings of the Azure Virtual Network. Question 4. Hotspot. You have an Azure Active Directory domain services domain. You create a new user named admin1. You need admin1 to deploy custom group policy settings to all the computers in the domain. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. What should you include in the solution? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, add admin1 to the following group. Our options are Azure Active Directory DC administrators, domain admins, and group policy creator owners. The correct option is Azure Active Directory DC administrators. To the next statement, instruct admin1 to apply the custom group policy settings by. Our options are creating a new group policy object and linking the GPU to the domain, modifying Azure Active Directory DC computers GPU, modifying the default domain GPU. The correct option is modifying Azure Active Directory DC computers GPU. Question 5. Drag drop. Your network contains a single domain Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The forest contains a single Active Directory site. You plan to deploy a read-only domain controller to a new data center on a server named server 1. A user named user 1 is a member of the local administrators group on server 1. You need to recommend a deployment plan that meets the following requirements. Ensures that a user named user 1 can perform the RODC installation on server 1. Ensures that you can control the ADDS replication schedule to the server 1. Ensures that server 1 is in a new site named remote site 1 and uses the principle of least privilege. Which 3 actions should you recommend performing in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. Select and place. The actions provided to us are: instruct user 1 to run the Active Directory domain services installation wizard on server 1, create a site and a subnet, create a site link, pre-create an RODC account, add user 1 to the contoso/administrators group. The correct options in the right sequence are: create a site and a subnet, pre-create an RODC account, instruct user 1 to run the Active Directory domain services installation wizard on server 1. About box 1, we need to create a site and subnet for the remote site. The new site will be added to the default IP site link, so we don't need to create a new site link. You configure the replication schedule on the site link. About box 2, when we pre-create an RODC account, we can specify who is allowed to attach the server to the pre-staged account. This means that the user 1 does not need to be added to the domain admins group. About box 3, user 1 can connect the RODC to the pre-staged account by running the ADDS installation wizard. Question 6. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. The network also contains 20 domain controllers, 100 member servers, and 100 client computers. You have a group policy object named GPO1 that contains group policy preferences. You plan to link GPO1 to the domain. You need to ensure that the preference in GPO1 apply only to the domain member servers and not to domain controllers or client computers. All the other group policy settings in GPO1 must apply to all the computers. The solution must minimize administrative effort. Which type of item level targeting should you use? Our options are: A. Domain, B. Operating system, C. Security group, or D. Environment variable. The correct option is B. Operating system. Question 7. Drag drop. You deploy a new Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The domain contains 3 domain controllers named DC1, DC2, and DC3. You rename default first site name as Site1. You plan to ship DC1, DC2, and DC3 to data centers in different locations. You need to configure replication between DC1, DC2, and DC3 to meet the following requirements. Each domain controller must reside in its own Active Directory site. The replication schedule between each site must be controlled independently, and interruptions to replication must be minimized. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence in the Active Directory Sites and Services console? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The actions provided to us are: create a connection object between DC1 and DC2, create an additional site link that contains Site1 and Site2, create 2 additional sites named Site2 and Site3, move DC2 to Site2 and DC3 to Site3. Create a connection object between DC2 and DC3, remove Site2 from default IP site link. The correct options in the right sequence are: create 2 additional sites named Site2 and Site3, move DC2 to Site2 and DC3 to Site3. Create an additional site link that contains Site1 and Site2, Remove site 2 from default IP site link. Question 8. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The root domain contains the domain controllers shown in the following table. A failure of which domain controller will prevent you from creating application partitions? Our options are A. DC1, B. DC2, C. DC3, D. DC4, or E. DC5. The correct option is A. DC1. Initial replication and connectivity requirements. This FSMO role holder is only active when the role owner has inbound replicated the configuration NC successfully since the directory service started. Domain members of the forest only contact the FSMO role holder when they update the cross-reference. DCs contact the FSMO role holder when domains are added or removed in the forest, new instances of application directory partitions on DCs are added. Question 9. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory domain services domain named contoso.com. The domain contains the objects shown in the following table. You plan to sync contoso.com with an Azure Active Directory tenant by using Azure AD Connect. You need to ensure that all the objects can be used in conditional access policies. What should you do? Our options are A. Select the Configure Hybrid Azure AD Join option. B. Change the scope of Group 1 and Group 2 to Global. C. Clear the Configure Device Writeback option. Or D. Change the scope of Group 2 to Universal. The correct option is A. Select the Configure Hybrid Azure AD Join option. Hybrid Azure AD Join needs to be configured to enable Computer 1 to be used in conditional access policies. Synchronized users, universal groups, and domain local groups can be used in conditional access policies. Question 10. Your network contains a multi-site Active Directory domain services forest. Each Active Directory site is connected by using manually configured site links and automatically generated connections. You need to minimize the convergence time for changes to Active Directory. What should you do? Our options are A. For each site link, modify the replication schedule. B. For each site links, modify the site link costs. C. Create a site link bridge that contains all the site links. D. For each site link, modify the options attribute. The correct option is D. For each site link, modify the options attribute. You cannot lower the replication schedule further down when you configure manual site link replication. Therefore, the only option left is to change the link site option attribute to use notification. D seems to be the correct answer. Question 11. Drag drop. You deploy a single domain Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. You deploy 5 servers to the domain. You add the servers to a group named IT Farm Hosts. You plan to configure a network load balancing cluster named nlbcluster.contoso.com that will contain the 5 servers. You need to ensure that the NLB service on the nodes of the cluster can use a group managed service account to authenticate. Which 3 PowerShell CMDlets should you run in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate CMDlets from the list of CMDlets to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The CMDlets provided to us are new-AD service account, install-AD service account, add-AD computer service account, set-KDS configuration, add-KDS root key, and add-AD group member. The correct options in the right sequence are add-KDS root key, new-AD service account, install-AD service account. Question 12. You have an on-premises Active Directory domain services domain that syncs with an Azure Active Directory tenant. You have several Windows 10 devices that are Azure AD hybrid joined. You need to ensure that when users sign into the devices, they can use Windows Hello for Business. Which optional feature should you select in Azure AD Connect? Our options are A. Device write back, B. Group write back, C. Azure AD app and attribute filtering, D. Password write back, or E. Directory extension attribute sync. The correct option is A. Device write back. Device write back is an optional feature in Azure AD Connect that allows the on-premises AD DS domain to receive information about the Azure AD joined devices, including the device registration state. By enabling this feature, you can ensure that the on-premises AD DS domain has information about the Azure AD joined devices, which is required for Windows Hello for Business to function correctly. Once this information is available in the on-premises AD DS domain, you can set the appropriate policies and configure the required infrastructure to support Windows Hello for Business. Question 13. Hotspot. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The forest contains a child domain named east.contoso.com. In the contoso.com domain, you create two users named admin1 and admin2. You need to ensure that the users can perform the following tasks. Admin1 can create and manage Active Directory sites. Admin2 can deploy domain controllers to the east.contoso.com domain. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. To which group should you add each user? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, admin1. Our options are contoso/administrators, contoso/domain admins, contoso/enterprise admins, east/administrators, east/domain admins. The correct option is contoso/domain admins. To the next statement, admin2. Our options are contoso/administrators, contoso/domain admins, contoso/enterprise admins, east/administrators, east/domain admins. The correct option is east/domain admins. Question 14. Your network contains a single domain Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The forest contains the servers shown in the following exhibit table. You plan to install a line of business application on server 1. The application will install a custom Windows service. A new corporate security policy states that all custom Windows services must run under the context of a group managed service account. You deploy a root key. You need to create, configure and install the GMSA that will be used by the new application. Which two actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. From among these options, the correct options are B and C. To create, configure and install the GMSA that will be used by the new application, you will need to perform the following actions. Create a new group managed service account by using the PowerShell cmdlet. New -AD service account -name pointed bracket GMSA underscore name -DNS hostname pointed bracket GMSA underscore FQDN principals allowed to retrieve managed password pointed bracket server1. This cmdlet creates a new GMSA with a specific name and DNS hostname and specifies the server1 as the computer allowed to retrieve the managed password. Install the GMSA on the server1 by using the PowerShell cmdlet install -AD service account -identity pointed bracket GMSA underscore name. This cmdlet installs the GMSA on the server1, allowing the custom Windows service to use the GMSA to authenticate. These two actions will create and configure the GMSA that will be used by the new application and install it on the server1 so that the custom Windows service can use it for authentication. It's important to note that the GMSA should be installed before installing the LOB application. Question 15. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The forest root domain contains a server named server1.contoso.com. A two-way forest trust exists between the contoso.com forest and the ADDS forest named fabricam.com. The fabricam.com forest contains 10 child domains. You need to ensure that only the members of a group named fabricam/group1 can authenticate to server1.contoso.com. What should you do first? Our options are A. Add fabricam/group1 to the local users group on server1.contoso.com. B. Enable SID filtering for the trust. C. Enable selective authentication for the trust. Or D. Change the trust to a one-way external trust. The correct option is C. Enable selective authentication for the trust. Selective authentication restricts access over an external or forest trust to only those users in a trusted domain or forest who have been explicitly given authentication permissions to computer objects residing in the trusting domain or forest. This authentication setting must be manually enabled. Note, when a two-way forest trust is created between forest A and forest B, all domains in forest A will trust all domains in forest B and vice versa. Question 16. Your network contains an Active Directory forest. The forest contains two domains named contoso.com and east.contoso.com and the servers shown in the following table. Contoso.com contains a user named user1. You add user1 to the built-in backup operators group in contoso.com. Which servers can user1 backup? Our options are A. DC1 only, B. Server1 only, C. DC1 and DC2 only, D. DC1 and Server1 only, or E. DC1, DC2, Server1 and Server2. The correct option is A. DC1 only. Members of the backup operators group can backup and restore all files on a computer regardless of the other permissions that protect those files. Backup operators also can log on to and shut down the computer. This group can be renamed, deleted or removed. By default, this built-in group has no members and it can perform backup and restore operations on domain controllers. Question 17. Hotspot. Your network contains an Azure Active Directory domain services domain named contoso.com. You need to configure a password policy for the local user accounts on the Azure virtual machines joined to contoso.com. What should you do? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, sign in by using a user account that is a member of the Our options are Azure Active Directory, DC Administrators Group, Domain Admins Group. The correct option is Azure Active Directory, DC Administrators Group. To the next statement, use a group policy object linked to the Our options are Azure Active Directory, DC Computers Organizational Unit, Azure Active Directory, DC Users Organizational Unit, Computers Container. The correct option is Azure Active Directory, DC Computers Organizational Unit. A GPO linked to the Azure Active Directory DC Users OU has no effect on the local user's account. You need to link the GPO to the Azure Active Directory DC Administrators Group and Azure Active Directory DC Computers Organizational Unit. Question 18. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest. The forest contains 3 domains. Each domain contains 10 domain controllers. You plan to store a DNS zone in a custom Active Directory partition. You need to create the Active Directory partition for the zone. The partition must replicate to only 4 of the domain controllers. What should you use? Our options are A. Windows Admin Center, B. DNS Manager, C. Active Directory Sites and Services, or D. ntd-sutil.exe. The correct option among all these is D. ntd-sutil.exe. Question 19. You have an on-premises server named Server1 that runs Windows Server and is configured as a file server. you have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure file share named Share1. You need to configure Server 1 to locally cache files stored on Share 1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you use? Our options are A. Azure Blob Storage, B. Azure Content Delivery Network, C. Azure File Sync, or D. DFS-R. The correct option is C. Azure File Sync. Azure File Sync can be used to transform a Windows server into a quick cache of an Azure file share. Question 20. Your network contains a multi-site Active Directory domain services forest. Each Active Directory site is connected by using manually configured site links and automatically generated connections. You need to minimize the latency for changes to Active Directory. What should you do? Our options are A. For each site links, modify the site link costs. B. Create a site link bridge that contains all the site links. C. For each site link, modify the options attribute. Or D. For each site link, modify the replication schedule. The correct option is C. For each site link, modify the options attribute. Question 21. Drag drop. Your network contains two Active Directory domain services forests named contoso.com and fabricam.com. Contoso.com contains three child domains named emir.contoso.com, apac.contoso.com, and emia.contoso.com. Fabricam.com contains a child domain named apac.fabricam.com. A bidirectional forest trust exists between contoso.com and fabricam.com. You need to provide users in contoso.com forest with access to the resources in the fabricam.com forest. The solution must meet the following requirements. Users in contoso.com must only be added directly to groups in the contoso.com forest. Permissions to access the resources in fabricam.com must only be granted directly to groups in the fabricam.com forest. The number of groups must be minimized. Which type of groups should you use to organize the users and to assign permissions? To answer, drag the appropriate group types to the correct requirement. Each group may be used once, more than once, or not at all. You may need to drag the split bar between panes or scroll to view content. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer, the group types provided to us are domain global, domain local, universal. To the answer area, organize users. The correct option is domain global. To the next statement, assign permissions. The correct option is domain local. Question 22. Hotspot. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest named contoso.com. The forest contains a child named east.contoso.com and the servers shown in the following table. You need to create a folder for the central store to manage group policy template files for the entire forest. What should you name the folder and on which server should you create the folder? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, name. Our options are central definitions, policy definitions, or template definitions. The correct option is policy definitions. To the next statement, server. Our options are DC1 only, DC2 only, server 1 only, DC1 and DC2 only, DC1, DC2 and server 1. The correct options are DC1 and DC2 only. Question 23. Hotspot. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. The domain contains the domain controllers shown in the following table. You need to configure DC3 to be the authoritative time server for the domain. Which operations master role should you transfer to DC3 and which console should you use? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, role. Our options are domain naming master, infrastructure master, PDC emulator, RID master, or schema master. The correct option is PDC emulator. To the next statement, console. Our options are Active Directory Administrative Center, Active Directory Domains and Trusts, Active Directory Sites and Services, Active Directory Users and Computers. The correct option is Active Directory Users and Computers. Question 24. Drag drop. Your network contains an Active Directory domain named contoso.com. The domain contains group managed service accounts. You have a server named Server1 that runs Windows Server and is in a workgroup. Server1 hosts Windows containers. You need to ensure that the Windows containers can authenticate to contoso.com. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The actions provided to us are: on server 1, install and run ccg.exe. On server 1, run new-credential spec. In contoso.com, generate a key distribution service root key. In contoso.com, create a GMSA and a standard user account. From a domain joined computer, create a credential spec file and copy the file to server 1. The correct options in the right sequence are: in contoso.com, create a GMSA and a standard user account. From a domain joined computer, create a credential spec file and copy the file to server 1. On server 1, install and run ccg.exe. Question 25. Your on-premises network contains an Active Directory domain named contoso.com. You have an Azure AD tenant. You plan to sync contoso.com with the Azure AD tenant by using Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. You need to create an account that will be used by Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. Which type of account should you create? Our options are: A. System assigned managed identity, B. Group managed service account, C. User, or D. iNetORG person. The correct option is B. Group managed service account. Question 26. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. The domain contains the domain controllers shown in the following table. You need to ensure that if an attacker compromises the computer account of RODC1, the attacker cannot view the employee number AD DS attribute. Which partition should you modify? Our options are: A. Configuration, B. Global catalog, C. Domain, or D. Schema. The correct option is D. Schema. To meet the requirements of processing sign-out events as fast as possible, it would be best to create separate Azure Event Grid topics and subscriptions for sign-in and sign-out events. This way, you can configure the subscription for sign-out events to have a higher priority and process those events with a higher priority. This will ensure that sign-out events are processed as fast as possible, allowing for a more responsive user experience. Question 27. Your on-premises network hosts a DNS zone contoso.com on internal DNS servers. You need to identify the name of the primary DNS server for the contoso.com zone. Which type of DNS record should you query? Select only one answer. Our options are: A. CNAME, B. NS, C. SOA, or D. SRV. The correct option is C. SOA. An SOA record contains configuration information for the zone, including the name of the DNS server that hosts primary zone. Question 28. You have an Azure subscription that contains 2 virtual networks named VNet1 and VNet2. VNet1 is in the US East Azure region. VNet2 is in the North Europe Azure region. You create a private DNS zone named contoso.local and link it to VNet1. You need to ensure that devices connected to VNet2 can resolve records in contoso.local. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do? Select only one answer. Our options are: A. Configure a peering between VNet1 and VNet2. B. Create a virtual network gateway on each virtual network and configure site-to-site VPN. C. Create a DNS server on a virtual machine on each virtual network and configure conditional forwarding. Or D. From contoso.local, create a virtual network link to VNet2. The correct option is D. From contoso.local, create a virtual network link to VNet2. By linking the virtual network to the private DNS zone, you enable name resolution by using the private DNS zone. Question 29. You have an Azure virtual network named VNet1 that contains an IP address space of 192.168.0.0/20. You deploy a virtual machine named VM1 to VNet1 and install the DNS server role on VM1. You need to configure the DNS server on VM1 to forward queries to Azure recursive resolvers. Which IP address should you use as the forwarder? Select only one answer. Our options are A. 168.63.129.16, B. 169.254.169.254, C. 192.168.0.2, or D. 192.168.0.3. The correct option is A. 168.63.129.16. Azure provides access to its recursive DNS resolvers by using an IPv4 address of 168.63.129.16. The IP address of 169.254.169.254 designates the Azure Instance Metadata Service, which provides information about the virtual machine from which the request targeting this IP address originates. 192.168.0.2 and 192.168.0.3 are the IP addresses reserved by the platform for internal use on the first subnet of the 192.168.0.0/20 network. Question 30. Your on-premises network contains an Active Directory domain services domain. The domain contains a server named Server1 that runs Windows Server 2022. You have a workgroup server named Server2 that runs Windows Server 2016 and has the DNS server role installed. You install the IP address management feature on Server1. You need to ensure that you can manage the DNS records on Server2 by using the IPAM feature on Server1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do first? Select only one answer. Our options are A. From Server1, run a server discovery. B. Join Server2 to the AD DS domain. C. Modify the DNS server settings on Server2. Or D. Upgrade Server2 to Windows Server 2022. The correct option is B. Join Server2 to the AD DS domain. The DNS server must be a member of the domain to which the IPAM server is joined or a forest that has a trust relationship if you want to be able to manage DNS server by using IPAM. Question 31. You have two servers that run Windows servers, have the DHCP server role installed, and are in DHCP failover relationship. The DHCP failover relationship state is listed as communication interrupted. You need to restore the DHCP functionality. The solution must minimize downtime. What should you investigate first? Our options are A. DNS server failure, B. Incompatible DHCP server configurations, C. Interruption to the network link between DHCP failover partners, or D. Lack of DHCP scope exclusions. The correct option among all these is C. Interruption to the network link between DHCP failover partners. In a Windows Server DHCP failover relationship, the interrupted communication state can occur due to an interruption on the network link between the DHCP failover partners or because the DHCP server service on a failover partner is unresponsive. This can cause a DHCP client to lose communication with one or both DHCP servers, interrupting the DHCP server service for clients on the affected network segment. Question 32. You have an Azure subscription. You need to deploy an Azure virtual WAN. Which three resources should you create? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select all answers that apply. Our options are A. A key vault, B. A site, C. A virtual hub, D. A virtual WAN, or E. An X.509 certificate. The correct options are B, C, and D, that is a site, a virtual hub, and a virtual WAN. Question 33. Your on-premises network connects to the internet. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1. You need to configure a site-to-site VPN connection between the on-premises network and VNet1. Which two resources should you create in Azure first? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select all answers that apply. Our options are A. A local network gateway, B. A point-to-site configuration, C. A virtual network, D. A virtual network gateway, or E. A virtual network interface. The correct options are A and D, that is a local network gateway and a virtual network gateway. To be able to create a connection between the local network and the Azure virtual network, you need to have a local network gateway object which represents the local network's public IP address as well as the address space of the local network, and a virtual network gateway which represents the Azure virtual network with its public IP address and address space. Question 34. Your on-premises network contains a server named Server1 that runs Windows Server. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1. You need to ensure that you can manage VM1 by using Windows Admin Center from Server1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you create first? Select only one answer. Our options are A. An Azure Network Adapter, B. An Azure Site-to-Site VPN, C. An Azure Virtual WAN, or D. An Express Route. The correct option is A. An Azure Network Adapter. In Windows Admin Center, you can use an Azure Network Adapter to create a secured virtual connection over the internet that extends the on-premises network to Azure. This lets you connect an on-premises standalone server to Azure virtual networks. Azure Network Adapter is a free, downloadable extension for Windows Admin Center that simplifies configuring a point-to-site VPN. It is to be noted that the questions from 35 to 40 are a part of a series of multiple questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. Some question sets might have more than one correct solution, while others might not have a correct solution. After you answer a question in this section, you will not be able to return to it. As a result, these questions will not appear in the review screen. Question 35. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain named contos.com. You need to identify which server is the PDC emulator for the domain. Solution: from Active Directory Domains and Trusts, you right-click Active Directory Domains and Trusts in the console tree and then select Operations Master. Does this meet the goal? The correct answer is B. No. The correct way is to first open AD user and account, then right-click and select Operation Master. Question 36. Your network contains an Active Directory Domain Services domain named contos.com. You need to identify which server is the PDC emulator for the domain. Solution: from a command prompt, you run netdom.exe query FSMO. Does this meet the goal? The correct answer is A. Yes. You can use netdom or netdom.exe and the query FSMO will list all FSMO roles including which server is the PDC. Question 37. Your network contains an Active Directory Domain Services forest. The forest contains 3 Active Directory sites named Site1, Site2 and Site3. Each site contains 2 domain controllers. The sites are connected by using default IP site link. You open a new branch office that contains only client computers. You need to ensure that the client computers in the new office are primarily authenticated by the domain controllers in Site1. Solution: you create an organizational unit that contains the client computers in the branch office. You configure the try next closest site group policy object setting in the GPO that is linked to the new OU. Does this meet the goal? The correct option is B. No. Question 38. Your network contains an Active Directory Domain Services forest. The forest contains 3 Active Directory sites named Site1, Site2 and Site3. Each site contains 2 domain controllers. The sites are connected by using default IP site link. You open a new branch office that contains only client computers. You need to ensure that the client computers in the new office are primarily authenticated by the domain controllers in Site1. Solution: you create a new site named site4 and associate site4 to default site link. Does this meet the goal? The correct answer is B. No. Unless a new site link between site4 and site1 is created at a lower cost. Question 39. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services forest. The forest contains 3 Active Directory sites named Site1, Site2, and Site3. Each site contains 2 domain controllers. The sites are connected by using default IP site link. You open a new branch office that contains only client computers. You need to ensure that the client computers in the new office are primarily authenticated by the domain controllers in Site1. Solution: you configure the try next closest site group policy object setting in a GPU that is linked to Site1. Does this meet the goal? The correct answer is B. No. No, configuring the try next closest site group policy object setting in a GPU that is linked to Site1 will not ensure that the client computers in the new office are primarily authenticated by the domain controllers in Site1. The try next closest site GPU setting controls how a client computer attempts to locate a domain controller if it is unable to locate one in its own site. It causes the client to try to find a domain controller in the next closest site, rather than trying to authenticate with a domain controller in a remote site. To achieve the goal of ensuring that the client computers in the new office are primarily authenticated by the domain controllers in Site1, you would need to configure the site link and site link costs between Site1 and the new office site so that the new office site has a higher cost to communicate with other sites than Site1. This way, the clients will prefer to authenticate with the domain controllers in Site1. Question 40. Your network contains an Active Directory domain services domain named contos.com. You need to identify which server is the PDC emulator for the domain. Solution: from Active Directory sites and services, you right-click default first site name in the console tree and then select properties. Does this meet the goal? The correct answer is B. No. Here are the right steps below. Right-click on the domain, click Operations Master, click the PDC tab to view the server, holding the PDC master role.